Hi, Justin. How are you?
Very well, Roscoe. How are you?
Mate, living the dream, living the dream. I am fairly excited, just quietly, about your show that you have coming up on the 2nd of September at the Astor of probably one of the most iconic bands of the 90s. It's called Come As You Are. It's the Unplugged and Beyond celebration of Nirvana. You've probably taken the most iconic band, I would say, at least in the 90s and beyond, that has shaped so many people's way they interpret music, the way they write music, the way they perform and play. How did that idea come about? It's not something where you just go, rightio, I'm a good singer, which we know you are from End of Fashion, but how did that idea come to fruition and come to life to master such a magnificent live and unplugged performance?
I don't know when it initially came. I think it was kind of part of sort of like a series of decisions.
Yep.
So the best I can track it back to is like well over a decade ago. So I think in 2011, I was a lead in a musical called Rock of Ages.
Yep. Oh wow.
And we finished that show. We played for 9 months in Melbourne, and then we did 3 months in Brisbane. It was meant to go around the country, but that's another story.
Yeah.
But we finished up at QPAC in Queensland, and as the show was kind of drawing to a close after 3 months there, we were bumping out for John Waters' show about John Lennon looking through a glass onion.
Yes. Yep.
Was starting to bump in. Not that there's that much to bump in. And I was talking to the not like the head producers. So it was like an American production. So there was the American producers, then there was the Australian producers, and then there was like, I guess, like the associate producers, who are kind of like the people that sort of facilitate what the producers want to happen.
Yep.
And we were literally at like the closing party, and I pointed at a poster of this for Glass Onion on the wall, and I said, it'd be really cool if someone did a show like that, but about Kurt Cobain, because he was kind of our generation's John Lennon,
100%.
In a way.
Yeah.
And they were like, yeah, that's a cool idea. And that was that. And then about 2-3 months later, I got a phone call, and the show closed, and I went home and yada, yada. And 2-3 months later, I got a phone call out of the blue from one of these associate producers, and they're like, hey, that idea that you had about a Kurt Cobain style sort of, one-man show retrospective, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
We're in. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And so we pitched that year. So now it's 2012. We pitched to Adelaide Cabaret Festival.
Yep.
The year that Kate Sobrano was curating it.
Wow. Yep.
And we got in. So we got it, like we pitched this show, and we got this show into Adelaide Cabaret Festival. And this is like a world that was totally new to me. Like I came from rock and roll, and suddenly I'm in, first of all, a music theatre. It's kind of less weird these days. So since I did it, like Phil Jamison was in that Green Day show for a while, and Lee Rogers has been in a couple of musicals, and yada yada yada. But back then, it was kind of, I was very much fish out of water. And then you throw like a word like cabaret in the mix.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was like, I don't know if I'm comfortable doing cabaret. That seems kind of, that's not really up my alley. And then it kind of got explained, like cabaret is literally it's a fancy French word for just telling a story with music.
Yeah.
It's that broad. Like,
Sold.
And and I've never sort of been exposed to cabaret before.
Yep.
And, we pitched this show, we got in, and then I had to write it.
That's when it pretty much got real. That I'm taking it. It's a great idea to all of a sudden, hang on a minute.
Yeah,
there's an expectation attached.
3 months.
Wow.
3 months. I just pull a show together. So it was going to be a one-man show. I ended up pulling a band in.
Yep.
And I basically played. I was kind of like, you always got to try and think of an angle with these things.
Yep.
So I was like, okay, the angle that I'm going to take is, as opposed to John Waters, who everything's original material in that, like all the monologue.
Yep.
it's all written by John Waters, imagining himself as John Lennon.
Yeah.
But I was just like, I'm going to actually use Kurt's words. So I'm going to tell Kurt's story with his song, like when they, like, you know, I tried to kind of find this balance between being chronological and being like thematic. So, you know, but all the words in between, the actual like storytelling that was happening in between, was literally pieces. The script was basically like cutouts of quotes and things he'd said on stage, journal entries, some lyrics, interviews. They were all Kurt's words.
Wow. That must have, how did you cram that into 3 months? That's almost like writing a biography of probably one of the most iconic performances of the 90s. Like, was 3 months enough in hindsight, or would you have loved another 3 months? Like, that's insane.
I don't know. It's kind of good working working to a deadline, because it just gets your ass moving. Like, the funny thing was, like, this is a little over 10 years ago. I'm 43 now, so I would have been 33 when I was doing this. And I hadn't really visited like Nirvana or Kurt. Like I'd remained a fan since I was a teenager, but I hadn't like really listened to a Nirvana record at that point for probably over 10 years. And I certainly hadn't paid all that much attention to Kurt Cobain as a person, you know. And what sort of struck me was how much my perception of who this guy was, how much that had changed in between, you know, 16, 17-year-old Justin to suddenly 32, 33-year-old Justin. And I sort of saw this dude as, because I was older than him at this point in my life. I still am. That he was, you know, when he died. And that sort of took me a little while to wrap my head around. And suddenly I was kind of looking, instead of like being a teenager looking up at an adult, I was like, wow, I'm older than you. I'm like looking back at you like you're the child now. Wow. And so that was really interesting. And I kind of like, you know, a few times while I was writing the show, I actually stopped and wondered whether I would have even liked this guy if I'd have met him. Or if, you know, it had been 10 years later and I was in my 20s when Nirvana had dropped, if it had been, you know, if I'd ended up having the same relationship with him and his music. And, because they were a massive part of my, like, identity as a teenager. I took
100%.
Not at work. I took time off school when I found out. I still remember, like, the radio alarm going off for school, and it used to basically be on, like, it was like 6:30. It was 6 o'clock maybe. And it used to be like Triple J's news.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
I woke up and they were like halfway through the report, and it was just like, you know, for those of you who've just tuned in, it's been confirmed Kurt Cobain, lead singer of Nirvana, has been found dead in his home, and blah 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 blah. I was devastated. I took like 3. It was like I was like losing a family member.
Yeah. Because he was such an influential part of most people's life. I mean, I was a child. I grew up in the late 70s, so I was born in the late 70s, so I'm only a couple of years older than you. But that sort of golden era of the early 90s redefined my love for rock and grunge, and it kind of then pushed, I suppose, my beliefs and my influences onto my music and the people that I loved that also followed his journey to where he got and Nirvana got. So it to me is probably one of the most, I suppose, shaping bands of the 90s that have influenced so many other bands that are still touring now. Reading some...
Nephew's 16, and so and he's sort of discovering Nirvana now. And I've asked him, like, he loves music and he's learning guitar and all of that. And I think he sort of spins out that, you know, he's got an uncle that's kind of carved out something of a bit of a semblance of a career in music. And but I asked him,
you do all right, just quietly, particularly in End of Fashion. You're a very, very affluent and very stage present front man. I've seen you quite a few times performing live, and there are definitely some instances where you guys actually not mimic each other, but there are definitely traits between yourself and and Kurt that I can see, particularly looking back of the older footage back in the sort of the 1992, 93 days, not so much necessarily on stage, but performing live. Particular show obviously revolves a good proportion around him and his stage presence and that iconic performance of 1993. How long does it take you to get into character?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess sort of going back to, like, you know, writing that show for Adelaide Cabaret Festival, it kind of, you know, there was a lot of finding this character back then. And, you know, like, that was 10 years ago, and we went and did that show, and it went really well. And because it went really well, we got invited to do the Sydney Cabaret Festival. Yep. And then it was actually off the back of that, it was a few years after that I started getting involved and doing some work with Perth Symphony Orchestra.
Okay, yeah.
And it was pretty early on in that relationship I started pitching, like, hey guys, don't you reckon it'd be a great idea if we, like, reimagined Nirvana's MTV Unplugged but with an orchestra?
Yes.
And they'll come over, yeah, we'll get back to us. But after, like, 2-3 years, every opportunity I had, they hired me to sing with them.
Yep.
I'd pitch this idea and, like, you know, pitch it. And finally, I think the penny dropped and something happened, and they finally turned around. I mean, the board came back and said, yeah, we think you might have something here. So we did that at His Majesty's in 2017 and 2018.
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of the reviews came from, because it's definitely in the ballpark. But, you know, fast forward a couple of years, I actually wanted to redevelop the show, because when we were sort of throwing the idea around with the orchestra, it took a long time to sort of find where it went. We ended up going with a full orchestra, no band, but for a while there, we were kind of talking about doing it in the old ABC studios and just having, like, you know, it feeling pretty small and exclusive, and just having maybe like another 12-piece orchestra with the guitar, and I was going to be playing guitar and blah, blah. It sort of just morphed and developed over time, but I never got entirely over the idea of actually, like, recreating the original performance. And after we did the Jim Morrison show at the Astor last year, my promoter, Jeff Halley, was like, you got any other ideas? And I was like, well,
as a matter of fact, I do.
I'd love to recreate, just as authentically as possible, Unplugged. And he was just like, I think it's a great idea. And again, we sort of talked about, do we do it somewhere at kind of the Quarry? Is it a Belvoir sort of thing, you know, in the summer? And I was just like, man, I reckon the Astors are really good setting for it. And here's where we're at now. And I kind of said that, it's been kind of actually like quite a long journey. It wasn't like I woke up one day and just sort of said, I want to recreate Unplugged.
I was going to say, couldn't have picked any less of an iconic set list you could have possibly tried. I mean, it's probably one of the most viewed set plays on YouTube in history. It's just,
I've added that pretty...
you and me both, I think, just quietly. Speaking of that, do you have the outfit, essentially, you know, that sort of old off-green cardigan, the jeans, the Converse? Is it?
Yeah, I've tracked down a replica, a pretty decent replica of the T-shirt that he was wearing, the Fright Week T-shirt, which is like a band who was a big fan of. And just like lots of sorting through op shops, thrift stores and stuff like that, try and 100%. Find a perfect shirt. He had this like weird kind of lavender purplish sort of drop, but not quite shirt that was beneath that. And then the cardigan's really kind of like was the hardest thing to find. His original cardigan was like made of mohair.
Yes.
And that's actually the first thing that he says in the recording. He comes out and the first thing you hear him saying is mohair.
Yes.
So I'm guessing like it's been like a real sort of like almost like I've had to be a bit of a detective when I've been like transcribing the show and writing stuff out. I'm like, well, why the hell did they say mohair? And that was like a little while later, I was just like, his cardigan's made of mohair. Someone literally must have asked him, Kurt, what's that cardigan made of? just as they press record, and he's like, mohair.
Oh, wow.
He says mohair.
That's crazy.
Okay, cool. That makes sense now. That's that answered. And,
yeah.
Plectrum and so
wow.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the first thing I say in the show. Mohair.
Oh, that's
so people
amazing.
Know, and those that won't will just think I'm just being weird.
Oh, you'll be surprised. I'm pretty sure there's going to be quite a few diehards there on the 2nd of September at the Astor, that's for sure. And you can also grab your tickets from Ticketet too. It's going to be an amazing show. Now, from what I gather, it's essentially the show itself is going to be split into two instances. The first being the iconic sort of MTV Unplugged performance. And then the second one is going to be a full rock set, sort of focusing a little bit more on their iconic live moments. I'm going to put you on the spot here. Which one's your favourite? Is it the sitting down and doing the spinning on the chair with the cigarette and the cardi, or is it getting up there and rocking out?
I like a challenge.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of gravitating toward the unplugged thing.
Wow.
Just because I think it's also like the more unique of the experience. I think that's what people are actually like parting their hard-earned money to come and see. Like, not to sort of underplay the encore, but I'm sort of seeing the second act really kind of as an encore. It's a bonus. It's a little kind of like, remember they kind of sounded like this, and like, this is a cool aspect of the show as well. Also, I just didn't feel like it was quite enough to get people to come out to a theatre and, because all up, I think Unplugged goes for, the full unedited version. It's like just barely brushing an hour.
Yeah.
I just didn't feel right sort of trying to call that a show.
But having the rock aspect to it, though, it's almost like the cherry on top, and I suppose then it can also give you that ability to go, okay, well, I'm out of the chair now, and and then I can give the punters, the fans that sort of eat, breathe, and live Nirvana that full band experience. It's a very unique way of looking at it, and I think and judging by obviously ticket sales, because they are moving extremely fast. So I strongly urge anyone to jump on a Ticketet and grab it, because it's on the 2nd of September at the Astor this Friday. Please jump on it, and it's all over the social media platforms. It'll be up on the Rockpit and also all the social media pages that we share as well. I strongly urge you, if you love Nirvana and a product child of the 90s, to go and check it out. The question for me, though, where does Justin find time? Like, you're obviously a front man of another amazing band, End of Fashion. You've just come off, and still doing, by the way, massive guns on the East Coast. You've had Uncaged, you've done Dallas Crane, Jebediah, you've performed at Retro Round at Optus. Where do you find time to put this show together, plus sort of keep performing?
I was going to say like good management, but that's like I would be like it's some like fear. Sometimes
it's a good motivator. Sometimes I could get it.
Big time. Yeah, but like I don't know. I guess like you do sort of have to. I mean, where does anybody find the time to do anything these days? And
true.
I take it. I take like everything that I do really seriously, but I've gotten better as I've gotten older, just to be able to compartmentalize. Like, I know I've had this show sort of looming over me for quite a long time now, like over 6 months. And I think I've gotten better at doing little bits and pieces to keep the anxiety at bay.
Yeah.
Like 6 months out. That's when I start like looking at the show, start like, watching his fingering, start like, working back on the accents and like, sort of just doing little bits and pieces, and then kind of knowing that, okay, when End of Fashion finishes their last show in August, that gives me 3 weeks, 3 solid weeks to do nothing but live and breathe this. And, I'm just, and that's it. That's like I wake up in the morning, like at the moment, and I roll over and I put YouTube on and
study
it's playing in the background, and I'm studying, and I'm I've written like tons and tons of notes and little reminders here and there of like, you know, what he might have been thinking in this moment, sort of help me sort of find this.
Because it's not necessarily just playing the music. It's immersing yourself in that experience that was him and his eclectic nuances that created him as a character and as a musician, and his influences to be this sort of all attention on the room performer without even raising a voice or very rarely changing his tone, but it just seems to captivate so many people, particularly in that 93 and on any of the Unplugged performances. He was just an amazing performer. I don't have any doubt for the slightest that you are going to fill that role amazingly. I've seen you perform quite a few times in End of Fashion, and you do know how to work a crowd really, really well. My fear, though, is this show's going to go gangbusters and all of a sudden you're going to have to traipse all around Australia, if not the world. Is there any plans for it to take it anywhere else after this?
Yeah, we'd like to tour it, but, you know, it's funny that you sort of use that word fear because, like, you know, in the back of my mind, this is just one of, like quite a few hats that I'd like to wear. But, you know, if an opportunity presents itself to, you know, like these days it's hard, especially post-COVID, and I know there's probably a lot of musos and actors, comedians, artists that might be listening and kind of going, yeah, man, like if an opportunity presented itself
you got to take
and
it.
This show did go well and, you know, it did present us, you know, the ability to tour and to earn an income, like, of course, I'd love to do it.
Yeah.
But then on the other side of that, it's really funny. I was like talking to my End of Fashion manager this afternoon. I was like driving to rehearsal for this show. Yeah. And she was like, how many years do you think you've got in you for a show like this? And I was like, I don't know. Like, it's a really good question. Yeah. I think like with the Doors, I've got like maybe 10.
Yep.
Like, it's a little bit easier to sing.
Yep.
But with Kurt, like, it's taxing. It's a really, like, it takes me 3 hours of warming up. Like, I get to the studio before everybody else to make sure that my voice is at this place where when they can walk in and we start About a Girl, I can sing it. Just so happens that About a Girl and Come As You Are, which are the two opening songs of the Unplugged, probably the two hardest songs. We'll
get rid of them first, you'll be right.
Yeah, it was just like in rehearsals and, you know, like even when we did it with the orchestra, it's like once those two songs were done and dusted, I could actually relax. And I feel like when I'm watching Kurt do it in Unplugged, something happens after he finishes Come As You Are.
Yeah.
Because he says very little. He says, you know, like, good evening, this song's up for a record, we'll speak it on it, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then nothing in between A Girl and Come As You Are. It's like he wants to get this thing over and done with as possible. He doesn't feel entirely comfortable. He's a little bit apprehensive. And then once they've got Come As You Are out of the way, you almost like see him like breathe this sigh of relief and smiling and starts cracking jokes. And he, you know, after that, and like Chris comes over and they've got like the whole, like, you know, it's a television show, you know, like, who cares?
Yeah, exactly. Who cares? We can play that song twice. That's fine.
Starts to actually like interact with the audience at that. And, it's like, and I sort of love that journey. So I don't know. I feel like there's this show. You can take as much as you want from it. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be train spotters. They're going to pick up on the fact that I haven't quite like fingered something the way that he did, or you know, and that's fine. That's like I don't like that. Doesn't really bother me so much. I'm kind of more like I want people to walk away from this show really just going like, I have this tiny, tiny, tiny little grain, like atomic-sized, you know, grain of what it might have been like.
Exactly.
The guys do this, you know, in the flesh, you know, 40 years ago.
Now, if I was going to be bringing someone along to this show that had never seen or had never had the privilege, I should say, of watching a a performance by Nirvana or Kurt or anything like that, had been essentially living in a cave probably for the last 30 odd years. In 10 or so words, what could you describe what you would like the audience to experience for this show?
I think there was just like a desperate, raw,
yep,
authentic, energetic, conflicted, crippled, extremely talented human being doing open heart surgery through art.
That pretty much sums up Kurt Cobain in a nutshell, just quietly. I mean, that for me personally, and I've been lucky enough to watch, quite a few videos. Unfortunately, not enough to see them live, but that pretty much in a nutshell sums up to me what Kurt Cobain and Nirvana at that peak of their prowess and sort of the early 90s was all about. I am very, very excited for this show on the 2nd of September at the Astor. I strongly urge anyone that does love that 90s grunge rock drama that has any semblance and in all honesty music taste to get out and catch this show. Come as you are, Unplugged and Beyond, a celebration of Nirvana, sung by a very, very talented man, Justin Burford. You are extremely talented, I must admit. From end to fashion, I don't doubt this from a second. This is going to be an absolute amazing gig, and this is probably going to kick off something of a bit of a tour for you, which is going to make you extremely more busy, unfortunately, and probably have to put on another more cap. Last question before we go. Bit of a tricky one, bit of a left ball question. What does Justin do? All right, actually, let me rephrase that. If I was to give Justin one day of freedom, so no work, no music, what would Justin do to unwind? You had no work to worry about. You didn't have to write any songs. You didn't have to play any instruments. What would be the one thing that you would just go, right, I'm going to go fishing. I'm going to go sail a yacht. I'm going to go rock climbing. What does Justin like to do to unwind?
I don't know if
Justin not unwound yet.
I was just like thinking, like, I think my psychologists probably have the same question to ask. Like, what? I don't know what that would feel like. I have no sense.
Wow.
Of what it might feel like to unwind. I don't know.
Spoken like
I
a
feel
true
like that
muso.
would be a little bit boring, to be honest. I'm like, if I don't have something that I feel like,
yeah, I get it.
some sense of purpose, or
and
I would end up filling that day of nothing with a plan. I think that's how I'd probably unwind.
Of what you're going to do the next day of working.
Figuring out what you're doing next. Yeah.
Well, Justin, it's been...
That's my idea of a good time. No, I'm not the most social person.
Hey, if that works, it works. Because at the end of the day, like you said, you've got so many musical caps that you're currently wearing at the moment, and you've got so much love essentially from a musical aspect that you're trying to share over so many mediums, and you are, like you said before, lucky enough to be an iconic frontman of an Australian band, End of Fashion. I 100% get it. Like, if you can enjoy doing something,
like, I kind of get to do for a living a little bit what I think a lot of other people would probably do.
Yep.
If they could, if like that would, like, I don't want to sound I'm actually the opposite of conceit. I'm just like, man, I feel so ridiculously lucky. I'm by no means a rich man.
Yep.
In terms of finances or anything like that. Like, don't get me wrong. I try and tell my nephew all the time at 16, like, you can be, I know it's being cool, but if there's anything else that you like to do with your life, I strongly suggest you do it, because this is not a ticket to diamonds and champagne by 100%. Any means. But having said that, the other flip side of that coin is it's like, man, like, I'm speaking to you in an interview, like, I reckon, and I think about this sometimes. In fact, I think about this quite a lot, especially as I'm getting older. It's something that actually I find a lot of peace in this thought. when I'm feeling sort of, afraid or anxious or just like, what am I doing with my life? And I turn around and I'm like, man, if 16-year-old Justin had any idea that at 43, I think I'm 43, was like doing promo for a show where he gets to get up in front of a full theatre of people and sing Nirvana songs, for example. And that's just one example.
Yeah.
Like if 16-year-old Justin had any idea that he's going to go on tour with Jebediah, or that a member of Jebediah is going to be in his band.
Yeah, exactly.
Or that he's been on stage and accepted an aria, or like played the big day out, like done some pretty like crazy,
some pretty cool shit. Just to be quiet,
things, man. Like, and it would be really easy just to sort of take it all for granted and to sort of like lose some perspective and appreciation of it. But every now and then, like I kind of go, hang on a second, like go back and tell JB what he's got in what's in store, because he's going to be stoked.
A lot of that's got to do with talent, just quietly. No, it doesn't. It shows that you're actually very grounded and put a lot of thought and passion into your work, and you love what you do, and it's not about
really
the money.
Love what I do.
And you're lucky enough that you have the talent, the ability, and the drive to keep that going, which not everyone has, or not necessarily in music, but in other forms. And mate,
that's the terror, Roscoe. That's what I was talking about before. Like,
what am I? Failure. I get it.
Well, yeah. Also, and the terror of mundanity. Like, this thought crossed my mind plenty of times. It's like, should I just like leave this whole gig and go and get a job? And then I like laugh. I'm just like,
don't do that.
I don't have the capacity to do it.
Yeah.
Like, there's sometimes I'm like, I don't do this stuff a lot of like out of choice.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people who make art their living, they will say exactly the same thing. It's just like, I don't do this because I think it's a lark and it would be fun to do. There's literally no choice.
I'm talented, I can sing, and I can play the guitar. This is what I'm doing.
This is what I'm doing.
This is what I'm doing. And you are doing it good, just quietly. I'm very, very excited for the show on the 2nd of September at the Astor. Remember, you can grab your tickets via Ticketek as well. I strongly urge you to get out there and grab them because they will go quick, smart. It is an amazing venue. It is going to be an absolute cracking gig. Come as you are, unplugged and beyond. The celebration of Nirvana. Get your tickets as quick as you can. Justin, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. Thank you very much for your time. I know you're super busy, and it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you.
Likewise, Roscoe. Appreciate it.
You're a champion. Thank you very much.
Cheers, mate.
Bye.
Bye-bye.